Good morning. Welcome to the 26th annual Petersheim Academic Expo at Seton Hall University in the lovely village of South Orange, New Jersey. I'm the Reverend Dr. Forrest Pritchett, a faculty member and administrator at the university. I currently serve as the senior advisor to the university provost for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and probably also accessibility issues. I'm a faculty member with the University Core, Africana Studies. I teach courses like the Black Church in Religious Studies and in our Interdisciplinary Studies program, courses such as the Peoples and Cultures of America. I'm very pleased to be the coordinator and host for our annual Nelson Mandela Martin Luther King Symposium on Global Justice. We do this to honor the legacies of the two men who in two different continents stepped up to handle probably life's most urgent issue, which revolves around race and the color lines associated with race and all of the relevant types of issues that would stem from that. An overview of what we'll be doing today will be as follows. We'll be doing a brief synopsis of the life and the impact of both Nelson Mandela and Dr. King. We'll then ask we've asked at least some of our students to join us, if possible, to share the impact of when they have gone into and looked at relevant material, looking at African culture and/or African American culture, and what that journey has meant for them. We will then turn our attention to another faculty initiative under the guise of our first-year writing team at the university. Dr. Kelly Shea, representing that team, will walk us through the English department's objectives for all first-year writing students. Now, in that context, this past year, Seton Hall launched a competitive writing program for all of our first-year students, which Dr. Shea will mention, but it dealt with the issue literally of justice. And she will begin to explain to you the mechanics of that. That effort actually dovetailed with another effort on behalf of a number of us at the university, from the law school and from our university core program. Doctors Busang and Doctors Enright and myself collaborated several years ago to look at bringing Brian Stevenson to Seton Hall University. So we fundamentally had two streams of activity that merged together, and with the assistance of our university provost, Dr. Katia Passerini, as well as the Board of Regents and their approval, the speaker, we were able to bring Brian to our campus, but Dr. Shea will go into some of the other details attendant to that presentation. So we welcome you to this 26th annual commemoration of the academic culture at Seton Hall University. And we are so proud to be operating out of the system of Seton Hall's 100, plus 50 years of existence, starting in 1856, and in the Catholic intellectual tradition. So without further ado, I'd like to begin to do some comments and perhaps to share with many of you perhaps some things you may not have known about the namesakes for this presentation. For example, here we have an image that I think is, to me, is just symbolic of the fact that indeed we had two men leading, if you would, different lives, but coming out of an interesting commonality, coming from different hemispheres, but once again facing that difficulty of the color line. Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois who was the first African American to receive a PhD in history from Harvard University, um, late in the 19th century, coined the following quote. He said, "The problem of the 20th century is going to be the problem of the color line." So as you look at the little graphic that we put together, and you see the multiplicity of skin colors representing the universality of all of mankind. I always remind students that indeed, while we all look different, probably on the outside, once you get past the skin, we are all exactly alike, even down to our blood. And I'll mention the significance of that in a moment. But once you go to medical school, once again, it's only superficial types of differences um, that hold us all together. But indeed, while we try to identify racial types, that has literally nothing to do with blood types. Those are really grouped and using scientific concepts. So there's no such thing. When I was a student, one of our professors reflected that once upon a time, America actually separated itself in the 18th and 19th centuries by the concept of what was called the one drop rule. And that notion was, if indeed you had one drop of Negro blood in you, then you were defined as a Negro. But of course, the only problem with that is, in terms of the critical thinking perspective or clear thinking perspective, there is no such thing as Negro blood, white blood, Indian blood. Anyway, I hope you can smile at that. One of the most difficult subjects to even talk about is race, particularly talking about that in America, and even talking about that historically, probably in South Africa. But let us begin our journey. What's in a name? Madiba, Michael. What's in a name? Many people in the Western Hemisphere may not be familiar with the fact that while we refer to him as Nelson Mandela, his African given nickname, one that speaks to his statesmanship, his role as an elder, a man who is moved by moral consciousness, was Madiba. This is how he was referred to, which is a great honor when indeed a name is generated from the culture itself. It speaks to his spirituality, it speaks to his consistency, and it speaks to the love and loyalty that is engendered from those you serve. And I might add, who is Michael? Who is Michael? Well, the man we know as Martin Luther King was actually born Michael King Jr. Indeed. And his father, who was a second generation preacher, and indeed, that would then mean that the man we know as Martin Luther King Jr., I mean, his grandfather was also a preacher. So I would say that's the first generation. His father then becomes the second, and ultimately, the man we know as Martin Luther King Jr. becomes the third. But he is born Michael King Jr. His father did a pilgrimage to Germany to learn more about European culture and the earliest roots, the formation of Christianity as influenced by the Protestant Reformation. And that trip was so profoundly transformative for Martin's father that he returned to America, and as if that journey of transformation gave him a new vision for himself and his family lineage, he changed his name. That is, the father changed his name, and he changed the name of his son, his 5-year-old son. So the man who was born Michael King Jr. becomes Martin Luther King in honor of Martin Luther if you would, the father of the Protestant movement. We have to reflect upon that because of what's in a name. Love, vision, commitment, requiring courage from both of these men. Some of the words now of Madiba. Great anger and violence can never build a nation. We are striving to proceed in a manner and towards a result which will ensure that all people, both black and white, emerge as victors. His words in 1990, and we all know that after 2 decades in prison, he was released in 1990. Without democracy, there can be no peace. So while the de Klerk apartheid government of South Africa may have called their form of government democracy, the black population, or as defined politically and legally there, the colored population, which then includes all people who are not white, all people of color, would be included in that classification. So in order to have full democracy, all must be able to vote. I had a very unique circumstance upon Mandela's release and upon the subsequent, ultimately, nomination of him to be the president in his election. We had a young man from our church in New Jersey. Coincidentally, his wife worked for the Ford Foundation. This young man was an architect by training, and his wife was a policy management director. But she had been assigned probably a 2 to 3 year stint in South Africa, and then he the husband was also assigned to do certain architectural projects in South Africa. And what we were able to do, because I wanted to bring a firsthand experience to our American congregation, but what it meant for many of the colored population to be able to vote for the first time. So on a Sunday morning, we arranged, we had very limited, in a sense, sophisticated technology that we have today, but I arranged to do a conference call and using something I had purchased from Radio Shack, which is simply a phone amplifier or a speakerphone. And we called probably at 10 o'clock in the morning, and if I remember correctly, it might have been 4 or 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening there. But what I wanted everyone in our American congregation to hear were firsthand accounts from Americans in South Africa at the time that voting was taking place. What was it like? What was the atmosphere like? What were people doing? What were they saying to commemorate the first time in their adult lives and had the opportunity to vote? And we heard stories about people standing in line, literally for some of them for hours, others for days, not wanting to give up their spot, being able to vote for the first time in their lives, experiencing democracy. What a blessed moment. But we were able to hear this and appreciate it. And I hoped indirectly it would give more of us in America who doubted the process of the democratic principles at the time, so many times when those principles were withheld from people who looked like us in various regions of the South, and now regions of the North, South, East, and West, with all types of voter restrictions. But it gave us a profound respect, once again, for the principles of democracy. We go on, Madiba says, we are fighting for a society where people will cease thinking in terms of color. Amen to that. So imagine someone who becomes elevated to be president, who speaks not only of a domestic agenda, ultimately for building the culture, and you'll see more about that in a moment, but also talking about building us all as a human population, and particularly in South Africa. When a man has done what he considers to be his duty to his people in his country, he can rest in peace. Amen. I guess he's implying here that indeed he will not be at rest until he knows he's done his best. And the last concept I want to call attention to all of us as we build an understanding and a paradigm of global justice as seen in the perspective of Nelson Mandela. Reconciliation means working together to correct the legacy of past injustice. Once again, reconciliation means working together to correct the legacy of past injustice. Legacies which would be hundreds of years in South Africa, and legacies which also would be hundreds of years in the United States of America. You know, the very interesting thing occurred in the early 1990s in South Africa, where there was such spiritual and political, psychological, economic reconciliation process, very comprehensive, that was undertaken. It was informed by the African cultural system called Ubuntu. It's like, I exist because we all exist. There is no separation. But Ubuntu would be that we see each other, we understand, we appreciate, we respect. There were thousands of incidents that had occurred over a 20, 30-year period where many Black South Africans had just disappeared as a result of police brutality. And many of the people wanted to know what happened to our relatives. Where are they? Were they incarcerated somewhere? Or were they killed and buried? Where are they? So Nelson was advised by the wise counsel of Bishop Desmond Tutu that rather than helping the nation to, probably even the nation could have gone to war, Blacks could have been so angry for those decades of strict racial separation called apartheid. They might have wanted to give the death sentences to those policemen and others who had caused the death of their relatives. That they wanted to have a peaceful process of reconciliation. So they proceeded with the umbrella of Ubuntu to show respect, and all they asked for any public official, any police official, was to come into the village of the person who might have been taken away and explain to the elders in the entire village what happened, admit your complicity in that event, apologize, and seek the forgiveness of the families and of that village. That's a very African approach to reconciliation. I guess probably one of the implications of understanding that might be, what might we all in America consider steps toward reconciliation? What would we all consider? And I know that foundations are being laid at Seton Hall University at this present time to look at what that might look like. And that there'll be a coming together of faculty and administration, as well as probably some students, to look at what racial conciliation would be looking at. We have a newly established center, and more news will be issued on that soon. Well, so then Madiba goes from looking at the cultural philosophy of redemption and reconciliation to the practical policies of what are needed within the continent. And in that context, these are some of the policies that he wanted to implement. He made a pledge that he wanted to start a 100-day crash program under his own personal supervision to provide immediate health and nutrition services to impoverished families. Also, children under the age of 6 and pregnant women would receive free medical care in every state hospital. Feeding programs for the malnourished children would begin in every school. He promised to invest substantial amounts of money into compulsory free education, and as a matter of urgency, to empty the prisons of children and to place them in suitable alternative care. He indicated that upwards to 25,000 children and those of juvenile age were being held in prisons. He also planned to build 1 million homes. And this is where a couple from our church who was associated with, through the husband, with architecture and building, and the wife with the Ford Foundation. This is where they and many others coming in from the rest of the global community were to be of assistance. Just meditate upon that for a moment. So we go from vision to execution through policy. Dr. King his approach is he calls attention to perhaps our philosophical understandings of policy and what is right and what is wrong in terms of the way in which America has related to its race issue. So here are two significant quotes from him as we look at them on the areas of the soul. So what is the soul for many of us? The Bible reminds us, for what should it profit any man or woman that you gain the entire world and all of its riches, but you lose your soul in the process? So Dr. King's approach was an appeal to the consciousness of this Christian nation. Not only will we have to repent for the sins of bad people, he says, but we'll also have to repent for the appalling silence of good people. We must come to see that in the end that we seek is a society at peace with itself, a society that we can live with in its consciousness. And in the end, if we do God's will, each and every one of us, we can say all together, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are all free at last. So we will now move to Dr. Kelly Shea, who will introduce our writing program.
Thank you so much, Reverend Pritchett, and good morning, everybody. My name is Kelly Shea. I'm a professor in the English department, and I do direct our first-year writing program. And I'm really pleased to be able to be here today at the invitation of Dr. Pritchett to present some students who have done some outstanding work with our summer reading program. So let me just tell you a little bit about that, and then I'll tell you how we're going to present the students. We, in the summer of 2021, as part of the Shoe Reads Community Summer Book Program, the class of 2025 was asked to read Just Mercy, a story of justice and redemption by Bryan Stevenson. The Shoe Reads Committee, in the coordination with other areas, initiated a number of programs to go along with the summer reading, including an honorary degree presentation and lecture by the author Bryan Stevenson, which Dr. Pritchett was instrumental in organizing. We also have had a number of classroom discussions in Core English 1, in the Journey of Transformation, and University Life courses. So the reading has, and it actually for many years has always been sort of infiltrated into these courses. We also had informal book club meetings, as well as the Shoe Reads Creative Content Contest. And so again, the Department of English has, First Writing Program has sponsored essay contests in the past, and we have also had essay contests coming out of the Center for Academic Studies, which used to be called Freshman Studies. Center for Academic Success is what it's called now. But we kind of merged, we combined, forces to do the Creative Content Contest for this year. So for this year, and this was sort of a revival of the summer reading program and the contest, we received about 30 submissions for the contest, and the essay committee and the Shoe Reads committee was happy to award prizes to 3 essay writers and 2 creative visual artists. I want to point out that the Shoe Reads program is co-sponsored by the Center for Academic Success, the University Corps, the Office of the Provost, and the Department of English. I'd also like to tell you, although it's not official yet, but we are looking forward to possibly using Just Mercy again as the summer reading for the class of 2026. We're awaiting final decision on this recommendation. We are excited about the possibility of using Shoe Reads as a using Just Mercy as our for a second year. It's the first time we've ever considered using the same book for a second year in a row for the summer reading, but we are really excited about the possibilities of using our sophomores, our rising sophomores, in terms of mentoring and doing workshops and things with the first year students on the book, since the second year students will have read it already. So that's a side project, but we're hopefully going to work on that. So we're really very excited about that. So pardon me, this morning we have invited, and they have all attended, our essay and creative content contest winners to present their work to you today. So what we're going to do is we are going to have the essay contest winners, of which there were 3, read their essays fairly quickly, and then we will have the visual artists present their art, and one of them is a website and the other is an actual piece of artwork. So we're very excited to be able to allow these folks to present their work in this forum and at the Mandela King-Symposium for Global Justice. Just Mercy is a book that is all about justice, and especially in the prison system and in terms of capital punishment. So I urge you to read the book if you haven't read it already. So I just want to thank you, Dr. Pritchett, for your support of these issues and, of course, of our students in particular. So I'm going to introduce the people, the students, one at a time. In other words, I'll introduce the student and then they will read, and then I'll introduce the next student, etc. So I would like to introduce for you today Disha Patel, who wrote an essay called Make a Change, Be the Change for Professor Maureen Shahzadi. And I should, of course, mention that the subject matter for all these essays and creative works, of course, is Just Mercy. So without further ado, Disha, please say hello if you would, and if you could read your essay for us. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. So like Professor introduced myself, I'm Disha Patel, and I'm going to be reading the essay, Make a Change, Be the Change. So my essay first starts off by saying, is justice blind? Yes, it suffers from a visual disease where colors distort what it sees, from the color of one's skin to the color of the paper they carry in their pockets. Black Americans are routinely subject to harsher treatment at every stage in the criminal justice system, while their white accomplices are favored. Society has ignored the injustice African Americans face day to day for countless years, and it's time to address it. Brian Stevenson, an African-American lawyer, sheds a light on the corruption in the criminal justice system by taking on different cases. In his book, Just Mercy, Stevenson explains that each victim's story and how the criminal justice system failed them. Stevenson defends the poor, the incarcerated, the wrongly condemned, without expecting anything in return. Like Stevenson, American society must find corruption in the criminal justice system and help those who have faced prejudice. Since the 1950s, African Americans have been fighting the same movement and battles, but society has yet to change. Since day one, African Americans have been discriminated against politically, economically, and socially due to the laws passed against them. The Jim Crow laws, the Black Codes, pig laws, and chain gangs are a few to name for. In Just Mercy, Stevenson exposes the different court cases where African Americans could not get their deserved justice. African Americans were lynched, shot, and even hung for talking to a white person. In Just Mercy, Stevenson shows that many people are afraid to have interracial relations because they were afraid of dying. For example, lynching of Charlie, whom Walter's family knew, was believed to have promptly been international romance, Stevenson said in his book. African Americans feared stepping out of the boundaries that white African Americans created for them. of fear of losing their lives. They were never indeed given the freedom of justice they deserved back then, nor now. Every year, millions of African Americans fear going to the grocery store to buy a piece of candy or riding public transportation because they feel targeted. A perfect example of this would be the case of Walter Mcmillan. Walter was an innocent African American man accused of murder solely because of his rumored affair. Stevenson states that there was no evidence against McMillan, no evidence except that he was an African American man involved in an adulterous interracial affair, which meant he was reckless and possibly dangerous. Despite the evidence being in his favor, Walter never had the opportunity to be proven innocent. This shows what a system has truly thought of Walter. They did not even see him as a human who deserves basic rights. The system turned against him in the blink of an eye, leading him to fall victim to the mallet. The judge would instead protect a white murderer's reputation than save the life of a colored man. That speaks volumes on social hierarchy. Similar to Walter, the criminal justice system has failed countless innocent souls whose only crime was their skin color. For generations, African Americans have been the scapegoats for white Americans. Stevenson explains numerous cases where an African American was targeted and blamed for a crime they did not commit. No one would ever believe the word of a black man when a white man was speaking against them. The validity of their argument did not matter, Stevenson states. Their testimony was laughably inconsistent and completely lacking of credibility. Though the testimony against Walter was not believable, the court and citizens believed it because it was coming from a white man, Ralph Myers. Walter had solid proof that he was not even there when Rhonda Marsden was murdered. Evidence was also shown that he never knew her, but his skin color made him a prime suspect, allowing Rhonda's real murderer to run free. Stevenson also goes on to explain that the system would fabricate evidence to condemn African Americans. He said that he had lots of people from the DA on down that he had coarsely to testify falsely against Walter. The prosecution constructed evidence, and the justice system coerced someone to put Walter away, shows how corrupt the system truly is. Another example of the corrupt justice system is that when Walter was on trial, the trial was moved to another state with an all-white jury. Even though it is illegal to have an all-white jury, many black defendants were not given this right. Stevenson claims that defendants like Walter McMillan, even in counties that were over 50% black, frequently found themselves staring at all-white juries. When Walter walked in the courtroom, he knew right away that he would lose the case and the jury would look at his skin color rather than the actual facts. African Americans are not given the same rights as whites, but instead they're used and thrown away when the system pleases. Stevenson in Just Mercy shows the injustice African Americans face while showing how to change the corrupt system. Stevenson incorporates different cases to prove the various ways African Americans are treated unjustly. He presents that this is not an issue regarding a local group or a national injustice. It is a book that every individual should read since it is an eye-opener to the blatant racism in America. The school system should try to implement Just Mercy to show teenagers the real society they live in. By doing this, teenagers are open to real-life problems they will face once they join society as adults. Also, every individual needs to step in and actively try to stop corruption in the justice system. By reading this book, you're showing that you see a problem, but just reading about injustice is just not doing enough. We need to make a change by protesting, advocating for equal rights. We need to help those who have been wrongly condemned and apprehended the actual criminals. And the only way we can do that is by putting racial injustice to an end. We need to change and be better our criminal system, and that's the only way we can do that is by doing it together. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Disha. Well done. Thank you so much. And applause to you. Oh, yay, applause. Okay, great. All right. Our next reader is going to be, if you'll just bear with me for a second, get my paper up here. We're going to hear from Sophia Diaz, and her essay was called Just Mercy, The Need for Reform Regarding Mental Health in Prison. And she wrote this essay for Professor Rachel Wagner. And thank you so much, Sophia. Without further ado, please begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shea, for introducing me. I am Sophia Diaz, a first-year student at Seton Hall University. I wrote this paper for the Shoe Reads contest during my core 1201 English class with Professor Wagner, particularly focusing on the mental health aspect of incarcerated people. To begin. My father has been in and out of jail for most of my life, so I am familiar with the prison system and how sentencing works. One thing that I feel is important to talk about, especially after discussing it in class, is the mental illness factor of being in prison. My father, among many others, is currently locked up and has suffered from severe mental health issues, some due to being imprisoned and some of which he had prior to being sentenced. Honestly, he still to this day suffers from severe mental illness. He is so unstable that he has even said that at certain points in his life, he would purposely go to jail to get medication for food and shelter. However, not once was anything mentioned about clinical therapy sessions or any active methods to help them cope. The horrifying reality of prison is that people who are incarcerated are not having their needs attended to. Being fed and given water is a basic need of survival, of course. However, having a healthy mental state is also a large factor in survival. Prisoners who are mentally ill are just thrown in jail to be drugged up on all kinds of medications without having the proper care of clinical sessions that should be acting alongside the medications for better results. Although people have made horrible mistakes, prisoners are still human beings and have the right to be treated as such, even if that means having their mental health properly treated and nourished throughout the duration of their stay in prison. The proper care and nourishment for mental illness and the overall well-being of incarcerated peoples is a topic that I believe is quite relevant and connects to Bryan Stevenson's memoir, Just Mercy. This memoir was informative of showing how truly unjust the U.S. justice system is. The memoir is told from the first-person point of view by lawyer Bryan Stevenson, who details his experiences through his years of work, particularly through the story of Walter Mcmillan. Not only was Mcmillan wrongfully accused of murder, but he also had to face many more hardships than the average person, especially all within the same short span of time. Outside of prison, people utilize clinical therapy sessions, outpatient care facilities, etc., for the same reasons as his, having so much going on all at once. Except unfortunately, Mcmillan, along with many others, have had to face the feeling of knowing that he has been set up for failure and will be sentenced to death. Imagine with the weight of knowing that you are being put to death for a wrongful mistake, where it feels as if no one is trying to fight for you. Mcmillan's trial lasted a day and a half. Where is the justice for him? This, of course, would be the purpose, spreading awareness to the public about the injustices that go unseen by the media and the common eye. This memoir took an inside dive into the raw thoughts, emotions, and power of Mcmillan's story. Before beginning to read Just Mercy, I expected it to be a memoir circulating around the idea of religion, being merciful in our communities and such. I grew up in a very religious household and going to church on a weekly basis as my grandparents immigrated here from Italy. One thing that I am for sure all religions have in common is that they center around the core principle of forgiveness and mercy. The memoir grabbed my attention once I realized the merciful aspect of the title was referring to mercy, in this case for Walter, but also for other people on trial in similar situations. According to Article 10 of the Sixth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, it states that everyone has the right to a fair trial. However, that clearly is not the case in our real-world reality. Unfortunately, this has been the crude reality of many other persons of color who face trial. Now this reality completely goes against our ideal principles of religion, which are forgiveness and mercy. People who make drastic mistakes should pay for their actions by serving a fair amount of time for their crimes, not by being put to death. The memoir is extremely powerful in its words, showing the readers the inside life of what it's like for Mcmillan and many other people in prison. With this power, Stevenson is attempting to, and in my opinion very much succeeds, to open our eyes to the injustices in the justice system, enlightening others on the outside in hopes for reform while also allowing us to truly see what is going on the inside of those prison walls. There is a moment in the memoir where after Mcmillan had been convicted of capital murder, he decides to reflect upon his trial in hopes of somewhat preparing for what will happen next. He not only has an unjust disadvantage going on trial where multiple people were testifying against him, but primarily because the jury was predominantly white. At this point, it is quite easy to feel hopelessness, the solidifying emptiness of realizing that the whole world seems to be against you. Imagine feeling this way without having any resources to help you process this own kind of solitary confinement. Stevenson uses Mcmillan's reflections on the trial as a tactic to get readers to feel the true rawness of the validity of the emotions of people who are incarcerated. He writes, "There were days when I couldn't breathe," Walter recalled later. "I have never experienced anything like this in my life. I was around all these murderers, yet it feels sometimes they were the only ones who wanted to help me." Stevenson 57. The purpose of giving this description of Mcmillan's emotions and insight is to show readers the crude reality that was made for him. He states that murderers, people who have killed others, some with intent, some without, were the only ones who had interest in helping him. That alone screams what is wrong with our justice system. By including this statement by Mcmillan, Stevenson's hopes were to teach that no matter the mistakes we make and/or how drastic, we are still human, and every human deserves the respect of being heard and having a fair trial. Being that it is 2021, you would think that by this point in time, we would have already had improvements in our justice and prison systems. However, that unfortunately is not the case. It is no secret how often prisoners are falsely sentenced and mistreated. Mistreatment in the prison system can vary, as there are many different forms: physical and/or verbal abuse, neglect, unneeded pharmaceutical treatments, etc. Where is the justice in that? Incarcerated people are serving a sentence for a time which they committed, but that does not make them any less human or derive them from their basic human rights. Their emotions and mental health are valid. Being incarcerated, separated from society, is already a penalty that they are paying. They should be given the standard and basic care needed to sustain their mental health, whether behind bars or not. Suicide rates in prisons have been rising rapidly, which helps us infer those rates are at such a high level due to the lack of care and nourishment to the mental health of people who are incarcerated. After the year of 2020, with the craziness of the pandemic, suicide rates in prisons have risen even more. How much longer are we going to let this go on before we make a difference? How many more prisoners need to feel like they must take their life to escape their own mental prison, caused by the lack of care on our part, for us to realize that it is time to reform our justice system? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Very, very interesting and powerful essays, so thank you all so much. Our next reader is Daisy Calderon Erendund. I apologize if I'm not saying your name well. Daisy wrote an essay called "Discomfort Can Shape the American Justice System," and she wrote that for her English Core English 1 course with Professor Christopher Ferrante. Daisy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. So my essay revolves around the idea that the book was uncomfortable to read, but that it was important, that discomfort was necessary. So to begin, from the creation of one of the world's leading superpowers, the American justice system has sought to protect its citizens from harm. However, a system that might have been declared sufficient in the 1780s lacks the authority and basic structure to encompass modern crimes. The American justice system was created to protect affluent white men, and that system, though revised several times, continues to benefit the same demographic. Bryan Stevenson's Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption, documents the systemic issues within the criminal justice system and how its deeply rooted racism and classism affect marginalized groups. The beginning of the book focuses heavily on the cases Stevenson has taken as a young lawyer, and the social work he was repeatedly exposed to at the beginning of his career. There are several chapters dedicated to each convicted person and how the justice system failed them as individuals. While describing what initially inspired a young Stevenson to pursue social justice work, Stevenson writes, "America's embrace of speedy execution was, in part, an attempt to redirect the violent energies of lynching while ensuring white Southerners that Black men would still pay the ultimate price." While the book specifically points out that male people of color are far more likely to be imprisoned and convicted for the same crimes committed by their white counterparts, the book also highlights how the justice system has failed impoverished citizens, pregnant women, and teens. The timeline of the book shifts various times, often recalling prior cases, Stevenson's youth, or the current case that he has undertaken with client Walter Mcmillan. While the shifts could be confusing to several readers, each period described holds significant meaning and forces the reader to draw attention to issues Stevenson looks to discuss. This narration decision utilizes pathos, the emotional purification, to emphasize the unfair treatment of these demographics at the hands of authoritative figures. As stated before, the criminal justice system was intended to protect the wealthy enough to deserve it. While today the United States justice system intends to protect all citizens, regardless of race, social status, or other differing factors, it has become apparent in recent years that there is still so much work to be done. Mcmillan was initially convicted for the murder of a white woman in 1986, and it wasn't until 1993 that Stephen managed to liberate him. Within the past year, the Black Lives Matter movement grabbed national attention by highlighting the systemic issues faced by marginalized individuals in our modern justice system. According to a report by the Sentencing Project, Black men are incarcerated in prison systems at a rate that is 5.1 times the imprisonment of whites. Poverty rates among this demographic are similarly sitting at astronomical numbers. The most recent census found that poverty rates among Black people were at 18.8%. With percentages this high, the lack of legal representation for impoverished citizens becomes very apparent. Stevenson subsequently repeats this notion various times throughout his book. The outward acknowledgement of the faults of this powerful criminal justice system captivates readers' attention and educates a likely ignorant audience on issues that persist even today. Though a significant portion of Stevenson's words center around admonishing the American justice system, the most memorable moments of the book are when Stevenson depicts the dynamics between prisoners and their respective families. When initially meeting Mcmillan's family, Stevenson writes, "The small home was packed with more than 30 people. I was startled by the size of the group, which stared at me appraisingly and then one by one started to smile at me. The hours passed and I knew that I had probably exhausted whatever helpful information could be obtained from Walter's family, but folks still wanted to talk." Stevenson emphasizes the importance of retaining humanity and empathy in cases where all hope is deemed to be lost. This is what makes the story authentic and utterly compelling. Readers are given raw accounts of the extensive effects of racism and are forced to re-examine their inherent privileges. Stevenson disrupts the hegemony of racism in the late 80s and 90s and compares this to modern inequalities that continue to be persistent in our justice system. While Stevenson's work fails to highlight radical notions that are the root of racism, such as institutional biases that remain in place to this day, the book does create a necessary discussion. In a world where marginalized voices are still continuously ignored, Stevenson's work creates a digestible form of literature for people to take in and hopefully understand what drives the movement. While Just Mercy tackles the vast majority of issues that allow hateful rhetoric against Black people and all people of color to persist, it is not as revolutionary as it could be. Stevenson's work as a lawyer and an author are commendable. However, it is important to note that regardless of that, Stevenson is a lawyer and as such is bound to uphold certain ideals that indirectly harm minorities. Therefore, while Stevenson did tremendous work and wrote about it in a moving way, his oath as a lawyer unconsciously prevents him from writing about the radical concepts that can diminish or eradicate institutional racism as a whole. Yet, despite this critique, the impact that Just Mercy had on the American public cannot be undermined. Throughout the book, Stevenson expertly incorporates aspects of his career as a lawyer in the South with the cases that shaped his law firm and career. He sheds light on the various flaws of the American judicial system and sparks conversation on how, if at all, this system has changed. As a form of entertainment, Just Mercy keeps its readers entertained by including various anecdotes that draw on pathos. Likewise, as a piece of literature and social justice, the book creates a meaningful conversation on certain issues with the use of ethos to establish credibility and logos to support his claims. He generates conversation on inequalities that remain in effect today and how they impact the way society responds to crimes, particularly those committed by Black, Indigenous people of color. Just Mercy is a well-researched and documented piece of literature that is both equally compelling and uncomfortable to read. The book captivated the American public and created an important nationwide discussion on the systemic issues that must be dismantled for real progress to be made.
Excellent, Daisy. Thank you so much. Very thought-provoking and interesting. Can you see how wonderful our students are? So thrilling. All right. The next two presenters are people who put together visual presentations. So the first one I'm going to ask you to speak is Noelia Herrera. And she created a website, a Just Mercy website, as part of her Core English 1 project for Professor Martha Zornow. So there's Professor Zornow. And where is Noelia? Are you there? Oh, there you are. So there's a million windows open right now. You're going to have to forgive me. I feel like I'm in the Matrix or something. But in any case, as soon as we can unspotlight my thing, Noelia there it is, can share her website. So without further ado, Noelia, thank you so much. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. Thank you for being here.
Yes. So this is my website, Just Mercy, a story of justice and redemption by Bryan Stevenson. I won't go through all of it, but a little synopsis about the book. Reading Bryan Stevenson's Just Mercy, a story of justice and redemption, is an eye-opening experience like no other. I had no idea what to expect. Little did I know this book would change my view on justice forever, specifically for the United States criminal justice system. From the perspective of activist lawyer Bryan Stevenson, Just Mercy writes to inspire readers despite countless stories of victims being made out to be criminals. In Just Mercy, he presents a kind of hope within a sea of darkness. This hope involves changing the narrative, as Bryan Stevenson famously says, By writing this review, I hope to supply people with enough information to decide for themselves that Just Mercy is an important book to read. Yeah. And then I go into what it's about. But as our readers before us said, they pretty much covered it. Concept. And then key takeaway, this book is guaranteed to make you feel all sorts of emotions, including anger, sadness, and maybe even shock. I still do recommend Just Mercy to anyone willing to learn something eye-opening. It is important to be informed about what is going on in the U.S. justice system because it affects everyone. Our money goes into these systems, and our friends and family can be subjected to incarceration at some point in our lives. No matter the case, there is no harm in new knowledge about the systems we live in. I found Just Mercy to be emotional and hard to read sometimes. Still, I like its challenge to me as a reader. It is inspiring to think about all the people that Bryan Stevenson helped and continues to help to this day. With this review, I hope I have encouraged people to be informed and aware of what is going on in the world. And one way to start getting informed is by reading Bryan Stevenson's Just Mercy. This is my little dedication to Bryan Stevenson and his works. All the links work. There's this inspirational speech that he made at Johns Hopkins University. This Everything About Walter, which is the main person Bryan Stevenson covers throughout the book, and the movie trailer. So anybody who wants to visit the website can also explore what Bryan Stevenson has done. And then, yeah.
Excellent, Nodelia. Thank you so much. Do you mind if I put the link to your website in our in the chat?
No, please do.
Okay, I'm going to do that right now for everybody. So there it is, and really well done. So you can see that for these projects, the students were focusing their work sort of as a review of the book. That was an option for students to do in their Core English 1 classes, I should say also for the professors to do. So I would like to also just thank these professors, as well as all of the Core English 1 professors, as well as the Journey of Transformation professors and the University Life professors, because everybody really helped their students focus on the book in different ways. And I just really gratified to see the very creative ways that people have both written and, of course, as you can see, created visual work on the book. So our last presenter is a student who did an actual painting, and her name is Rachel Suazo. She took Core English 1 with Professor Mark Rains, although I don't think the painting was allowed as a assignment for the course. But Rachel did make a painting, and so we're going to ask her to share that with us visually and speak a little bit about the idea for the painting and some of her thoughts about the book and the story that the painting depicts. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you, Dr. Shea. Hi, my name is Rachel. This artwork that I did is called Where is Justice? I did this, I finished it on October 30th, 2021. And it represents the 14-year-old boy named Charlie that Bryan Stevenson represented in the book Just Mercy. This child was tried as an adult for murdering his mother's abusive boyfriend, and he was sent to an adult prison where he was raped and beaten every day. And here in the painting, I wrote that, I'm only 14, because he was only 14 years old when this happened. And I covered his eyes with a black bar, not to just hide his identity, but to symbolize how he didn't see justice when he was tried as an adult, because he was sent to a place where he would be vulnerable to predatory adults and no one helped him until Bryan Stevenson came. And when he found out what was happening to Charlie, he demanded that Charlie be moved from this environment. And he spoke with the judges and the prosecutor from the trial, and they were able to put Charlie in a protected single cell. And yeah, and so you can't really see it in the picture, unfortunately, but the background of the painting, it's kind of like a gray, like here is brighter than everything else, to represent like the fading, like the fading light of hope, because Charlie has been suffering for a lot of time, and he felt hopeless, and so I did that to like represent that hopelessness. And eventually he did find, justice, well, in a way, because Bryan Stevenson represented him and was able to move him to a juvenile prison where he stayed for a few years. And when he was released, a kind white couple helped him financially for college. And yeah, if Bryan Stevenson never intervened, Charlie would have continued being tortured and raped by the prisoners in the adult prison. And I not only wanted to make this painting represent Charlie and his suffering, I also wanted it to represent all the youth, especially the youth from, the Black communities, the Latino communities, who were wrongfully convicted of crimes and tried as adults and sent to these adult prisons where they are suffering in silence since their stories aren't known. And yeah, that's the whole inspiration behind this painting.
That is just beautiful, Rachel. Thank you so much. I just really appreciate you sharing that, especially hearing more about, sort of your thinking behind the book, this boy's experience, and sort of your creation of this work. In fact, Bryan Stevenson spends a lot of time in the book on the children in the prison system, and that is a big focus of his. So we really appreciate you sharing this artwork with us. Hopefully you still have it, and we can maybe we can display it in real life someday, because we've only been able to display pictures of it a couple of times. But we really appreciate your being here and speaking about it. So thank you so much again. So that really concludes this part of the program. I just really want to thank the students, who I'm just so proud of them, because they all came today and they were all able to show up. And I know that perhaps their family members were not able to be here, but we'll have a recording of this program, and that way they can share that with their loved ones, and they can be as proud of them as we are of them. So I would just like to conclude by again thanking Dr. Pritchett for including the Just Mercy award winners in the program today. And I'm going to hand it back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shea. I know that touched all of us. And I just love the concept of us involving our students as partners in this quest for understanding social justice in the American perspective, as well as I pointed out earlier, the international perspective of looking at global justice, and two men and who are more public figures. But I might add that throughout all the continents of the earth, there are thousands of freedom fighters, as I might call them, and their stories need to be told, both male and female. And I'm actually so proud of the current generation of young people that we see, who are seeing their way through the kind of haze that's coming up around the whole issue of climate justice, if you would, the warming of the planet. And they're just saying that all of you politicians, you're just full of hot air, and you better straighten this whole thing out because, you know, we are inheriting the planet that literally you all are destroying. So it is powerful. And I'm so glad that Seton Hall University is taking a very committed moral stand on the way in which we help to educate, enlighten, and empower our current generation of students. So I believe Ms. Wrighton is with us, and I'm hoping that all of our little technical steps will be can be taking place. And so with the assistance of our technician, perhaps. Good morning, Ms. Wrighton.
Hi,
So
Professor.
we're now we've asked one student from the university who was available to share in the context of having probably first studied something at the university that helps to give her more understanding of what it means to look at African heritage, looking at African American struggle in America, and what that means for her. So we're going to be spending a few minutes now with Allison Wrighton, who will tell you who she is, what year she is in school, what her major is, what her interests are, what she does. And my understanding is I have to really compliment her. My understanding is she worked a late shift last night. It might have gone past midnight. I'm not too sure, but she did thought it not robbery of her time to be with us today. So Allison, in your own way, you're going to be sharing your journey with us. So I hope our technician will be able to make sure that the full effectiveness of your presentation can be realized. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor. Can you see my slides?
We can, and maybe if
Okay.
you could put it into either presentation mode, just to make it full scale or full screen.
Okay.
That way, more will be able to appreciate the detail that's within it.
Can you see it now?
We see it.
Okay. So my name is Allison Wrighton. I am a senior right now. I have only one more semester to go, which is in the fall. I'm going to have bachelor's in behavior science, social and behavior science. So I was fortunate to have Professor Pritchett as my professor in African studies. So I am very grateful that I have the opportunity to display what I have learned as in the intro of African studies. So let's cut. All right. So here. So the definition that I have for African studies. African studies focuses on African continent, the people of African descent in the global African diaspora. We look at Africans' movements, their migration, and the scattering of people from their ancestral home, a home preserved by their families, to a broader and more geographical area, such as a new region or to an entire new country. What is the intro to African studies? So here I have a mixture of different topics we went through, like the study of African history, pre-colonial, colonial, post-colonial, the demographic, ethnic groups, culture, politics, economy, languages, and religion. These are some of the influential people that we spoke about in our African studies. You have some of the photos here, W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey. We had Martin Luther King. We talked about Malcolm X, Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells Barnett. The study of African history, pre-colonial and colonial, post-colonial demography, ethnic groups. During this course, we learned that the history and experiences of Black people from a different standpoint, such as historical, cultural, economical, political, sociological, and psychological perspective. We studied the effects and the impact of American Revolution had on the movement to abolish slavery. We also learned how African history influenced many authors to write books, to create films describing the past and present influences of African history had on them and the values and how it impacts the world today. So I'm going to talk about the impact of African history studies had on me. This Intro to African Study course provided free place and an environment to expand and develop my mind on how to use critical thinking when it comes to African history. The course also helped me appreciate and recognize the significance in understanding the varieties of human behavior and the respect of how to respect other people and their differences and opinions of other peoples. Over the course of the semester, I also had the opportunity to explore and examine the importance of race and identity. These conversations has helped me understand myself, and more importantly, to be more aware of the differences and inequalities born through racism and how it also shaped the world we live in today. So one of the impacts through this course was, or the most significant one that impacted me more, was the Intro to African Studies, is being part of the marking of the enslavement and transatlantic human trade, which is now situated in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. There are so many benefits to studying African history. Through history, we learn how past ideologies, beliefs, principles, systems, government, culture, and societies has impacted the world we live in. We're going to learn how to explore African history from that point of view. So I'm going to show you some of the photos that I took from the event of the Middle Passage, Perth Amboy. So you're going to see some of the hosts that participated in the event. And I'm going to let you look at the photos. This was part of the music that was playing during the event. So as you can see, that day we had the event was a beautiful day. The sky was blue. I mean, it was a perfect day for an event like this that was done outside. So it was I'm very happy that I was able to participate. So here, this is my conclusion about about the Intro to African Studies. Africa is the birthplace of human species. You learn to explore and understand from an African standpoint. Through history, we learn how past ideologies, beliefs, principles, systems, governments, cultures, and societies has impacted the world today. History helps us understand our identities, where we come from. There is more to African history than slavery, more to African history than the fighting for basic rights and equality. Black history is powerful. African history is beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. And it's so gratifying when we hear from a student perspective the relevance of the material that we as professors make available to all of you, hoping that ultimately the impact on you is not only within, obviously, our course objectives, but indeed that they might be a lifelong learning experience that evolves out of that. I might also point out to everyone for your information, the last slides that Allison was showing you about the port marker. The larger context of this is that a United Nations commission has identified about 175 different ports around the world in which the ships containing the African bodies sailed from. And the number of them have obviously been determined within the United States. Along the eastern seaboard. And in October, there was the unveiling of the port in Perth Amboy, where the ships were bringing in these Africans. And we took a bus load of any students in any of our courses who wanted to come to that ceremony. So once again, this is an effort which is being coordinated through a commission out of the United Nations. So we were so proud to be a part of that ceremony. It involved people from the governor's office, from the UN, and so forth, at which they asked me to make some comments in addition to the other dignitaries who were present. We'll take a few minutes if there's anyone from the audience who might want to ask a brief question of any of these students. That helps us to enhance the nature of these. Allison would get you to stop sharing your screen, perhaps also. But as a way of enhancing this virtual environment, we can all take a minute. We had the students who presented their works on Just Mercy, and we have Ms. Wrighton. But if anybody wanted to ask a brief question of any of these students, I think we can indulge that for a moment. Were there any questions from the audience? And we do appreciate all of you taking time this morning to take part in this event, which is one of probably of 30 or more events which have been generated by our Petersheim committee. Now there's a hand up I may have to go to in order to identify that hand.
Elizabeth has a question.
The red one? I'm sorry, Mike, what did you say?
Elizabeth has a question.
Hi, thank you. I'm so grateful to the faculty and students for these truly inspiring presentations. Like I'm hoping we can teach this again next year, and it's making me so excited to get back into the classroom. And I guess I'm just so impressed by all of you. You've really made me think about this text all over again in new and exciting ways. So I guess my question is, as students who've recently learned about Bryan Stevenson and this text, what advice do you have for us as faculty to kind of get students so interested? Obviously, your professors did such a wonderful job too, but I'm just curious as students, like what was that moment where you thought I'm so excited about this text? How can I, if I'm teaching this class, this text again, which I hope I am next fall, how can I try to get my students as interested as you both, as all of you have been? And then my second question is that piece of artwork, we got to get that up somewhere on campus. I want to be able to show it to my students. It's so moving. So I guess that's my question for all of you, is if any of you can reflect on kind of that moment when you got so excited about this text, and anything that you can give us as educators who are trying to learn from all of you, since I've learned so much from you today, as we hopefully teach this next semester. Any of you?
Sophia, I think your hand is up. Go right ahead, please.
I know one thing that I can say, the moment that I knew that I was just interested in the book is because personally, I have a personal connection, with my father, him being in prison. So I'm familiar with the system, and it automatically had my interest. But in class, my Professor Wagner, she'd make us do she'd pull excerpts out and we'd read it in class. And I feel like that, incorporating that kind of grabs the students' attention, just in case, we never know if they actually read it over the summer. So, incorporating it in class, it'll grab their attention. So that's one thing that I can say.
And Sophia, let me thank you for your transparency in life. I think the way most environments are in life is that we want to insulate ourselves from the things which have caused us injury. But I think your transparency will actually, has helped you, your family, but will probably help others who heard what you said in class and so forth, to pierce the veil that may be surrounding their lives on some issue also. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
I look forward to meeting you, by the way, in person, outside of the virtual environment. Just seek me out. You see my name. Thank you. No problem at all. I go into a lot of prisons when I'm invited. I have a security clearance to lecture to prisoners. And I normally do not go in with my agenda. I ask the prisoners, what would they like me to speak about? So that indeed their satisfaction is guaranteed. Are there any other questions? Any other questions? I see. Is that Rachel? Yep. Thank you.
Hey, yeah, I was just trying to get my camera on. So I have a question to the five presenters too, or anybody who wants to answer. I guess they all seem to be saying that the awareness is so key, and that seems to be a pretty common idea just in general. We need more awareness of the problem, but what do we do after the awareness? What comes next? More people are aware, more people read the book, they care more about the situation. What comes next, I think, is my question to any of the five who want to, address that.
Daisy?
So for me, when I was doing my paper, I thought about what do you do next after, the next step, and I think a big part of it is amplifying Black, Brown, Indigenous voices, because I think you can read all about their experiences, you can support them economically, by buying their books, by buying their artwork and stuff like that, but you have to amplify their voices too, because it's not just about having the book and owning it and being like, oh, look, I have the book, I am educated. No, you have to also amplify those voices. So, on social media, it's so easy to do it. You just repost their stories, comment on their posts, amplify those sort of voices. And I think that slowly makes a difference, but I think it's an important one.
Thank you. Is there another question? Well, I might also add to that last statement, but only time will tell what will happen when I mentioned the project. Years ago, to raise awareness with students and faculty at the university, I put together trips into the state prison system. And we had to get security clearances on everyone who wanted to go. But I thought that was my way of helping others to understand the culture that can exist within the prisons. And I would just mention as a point of information that really within 15 minutes of the university is a state prison, which is located in the vicinity of Newark Airport. And then when we drive toward the center of the state in Rawley Prison is dedicated to people who are committed for life with no possibility of parole. But I mention that because as soon as the health conditions and we are out of our COVID pandemic, it is my intention once again, God willing, to be able to take bus excursions into those vicinities. So I would just tell everyone who's interested, just stay tuned. I will normally network this through organizations on campus and through various professors. So I just wanted to share that notion with everybody, okay? Is there another question from anyone? Well, seeing no other hands raised, I will once again like to thank all of you participants and the audience on behalf of our Petersheim Planning Committee for being with us for the 26th Annual Petersheim Academic Expo. I'd like to also take this moment to cordially invite all of you at 3 o'clock. We will be in McNulty Hall Auditorium, the Science Building, for our closing ceremonies. You are cordially invited to all of that. And until we can meet again, I'll say, God bless us all on the journey of life. God bless those in the healthcare community, such as Ms. Wrighton, who was a student and involved in the healthcare environments, so that as we are diligent through this pandemic, that indeed we'll all come out of this on the other side. I would also like to mention, particularly for the young people, a larger view of what we're going through would tell us this, that the pandemic itself will actually make a mark on your generation, so that it will be years from now or decades from now, there will be profound beyond the inconvenience of the last couple of years on your lives. This will probably make an impact upon your character development in your value system, believe it or not. And that's what history tells us. So we look forward to see how you translate all of these experiences, both in the classroom and obviously in the atmosphere, so to speak, how you translate this into your leadership style and the impact that you're going to make in your space. So once again, for everybody, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for interacting with us. And we do look forward to seeing you on campus. Please give me a shout out if you see me walking, because you'll recognize me probably before I might actually recognize you, but I really appreciate that. I want to thank Mike, also our technical director, for all of his behind the scenes work and for catching all of the little errors that might have popped up occasionally. So thank you all, and we'll see you next time around. Thank you and God bless. Bye-bye.